Welcome, welcome, welcome. Between Three Rivers, we're here, and we're excited with our guest here today. So, Nate? What's your last name?
Moellering.
Moellering. That's what I was going to ask you what that.
One of Fort Wayne's finest families, actually, the Moellering family. I go back to when your dad Carl was.
That's actually my grandfather.
I'm sorry, grandfather.
Yeah.
In the construction business, and in fact, he was on the cover of Business People magazine. I would guess in the 1980s.
Probably.
It had to be late 80s because I only started in '87. Yeah. But his grandfather was on the cover as a construction guy, and so I know the family. I don't know it very well. I know you better than anybody at this point. And so welcome, Nate. We're glad you're here. And Nate has a fascinating story to share, and it's really exciting that we get you in here so you can share it with our audience. And if you don't mind, take us back. You were an athlete, a football player in high school, college. Tell us about you. What's your story?
Well, I grew up right here in Fort Wayne. My entire family's from here, as you said. My family on the Moellering side has been around for quite some time. It's funny. I actually came across one of the Facebook pages. It's something like titled "History of Fort Wayne" or something like that. And there was a picture, a black and white picture of one of not my great grandfather, my great grandfather from like the 1906 or something like
way
that.
Back.
Wow.
Way back down on the family tree. So we've been here a very long time. Actually, it's part of the. Do you know where the Lutheran Foundation is on Fairfield there? So the Lutheran Hospital used to be there.
Yeah, right.
And there was a Moellering wing of that Lutheran Hospital. Actually, that's how far back my family's roots go. Which is going to be interesting as you hear my story, because you're going to say, how did this guy who came from this family of people end up where he ended up before where we are today? So my family was fairly well known, especially because I went to St. Paul's Lutheran School downtown, which is a private school. It's Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and it's K through 8th. Okay, so those parochial schools are fairly small.
Yep.
People all know each other. My great grandfather, my grandfather, and then my father and his brothers all went there. So right off the bat, I get into kindergarten, and everybody knows who I am. On the other side of my family, which is the Binkley side of my family, there was Char Binkley, who was the first female radio executive in Christian radio, I think. I don't know about in the U.S., but at least in this area for WBCL. She was on WBCL radio for years, which is a big Christian radio station. So people knew either me from that side or from my Moellering side on my dad's side. So it was one of those things as a kid where you walk in and people are already like, oh, you're a Moellering. Oh, you're from the Binkley family.
Expectations were high, weren't they?
Yeah.
They would say, oh, your grandparents are so phenomenal, wonderful people. Oh, your father was such a wonderful student, such a great guy. Your family, you can do whatever you want. You come from great stock. And as a kid, you're like, I don't know what that means.
Right.
Right? And they're heavily involved in the church. And so it was one of those things where they're like, well, you must love the Lord so much. I don't know what that means. Like you grow up hearing the stories and things, but each person has to find their faith, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that means to them. And it's very personal and meaningful to all of us. So I was just freaked out as a kid, like most kids probably would be, right?
Absolutely.
And so with that pressure, honestly, and the thing for me was as a kid, as people are going to figure out, but for those of you who don't know, I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means I used to struggle with drugs and alcohol addiction pretty severely, and we'll talk about that. But most of us start using drugs and alcohol because we feel disconnected from our fellow man, right? We can walk into a room full of people and feel completely alone. I always felt like, I say this all the time, but I always felt like an alien that was dropped off on this planet from Mars, and everybody else was from Earth.
Yeah.
And their interactions were seamless, right? Kids didn't seem to think about what they were going to say to each other, whereas I walk up and I'm like, is that funny? I don't know if it's funny. I'm going to say it. Oh, nobody laughed. They're going to think I'm stupid, right?
Right.
I'm that kid, when they're going around the class reading, I'm trying to count the paragraphs so I can read it to make sure I don't mess it up so nobody makes fun of me. And nobody was making fun of me. I was just a self-conscious kid.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. Well, and that, do you think it had to do with that expectation?
Oh, yeah.
Of like, you always heard of, oh, you're going to do this, so you're probably going to do this, and then you're like, well, I kind of want to do what I want to do too, though.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And you didn't want to let anybody down.
I didn't want to let anybody down. And, you know, just being around all those people, I was always astounded, just from a young age, as to how adults could keep everything straight, get up, go to work, do all these things. It all just seemed so overwhelming. And I think it does to most kids. Like when you're 5 years old, you're not supposed to be at that level, right? But as a kid and seeing that, and then just see the respect that people in my family got, the way people talked about them, even the way, you know, my dad's friends would talk about what a great athlete he was and what a great student he was. And my dad's an attorney too. So it was like, well, he was a good athlete and he's smart, you know? I'm like, yikes. What am I supposed to do with that, you know?
Yeah.
And so, man, from a young age, it was one of those things where I kind of decided, and I don't know if it was a conscious decision. I don't remember it being a particularly conscious decision, but it was one of those things where I decided I'm going to be the guy who doesn't really care. Because if I just fail on purpose, then it's not because I tried and I couldn't do it. It's because that I don't care. I don't care if I get good grades, you know, because it's stupid. Right?
So it was easier that way.
It was easier.
Yes.
That was my first.
Yes.
What you'll see, that was really one of my first ways that I engaged in what we call escapism, which is to kind of alter your reality in a way so you can deal with it. You can take it in and change it a little bit. I remember as a kid too, like I was really into, as most kids are, but I was really into like eating sweets and, you know, just watching as many of my favorite movies as I could, which people that say that sounds normal, but we see that out on a societal level today as like a problem for a lot of kids, right? Where you get into binge watching and binge eating and all these things. So that was probably my first experience as a very young person with like going overboard. And you'll see too in my story, and I always talk about this, people that struggle with drug addiction, substance use, we're very all or nothing, right? Like we talked about, you guys gifted me the chocolate, and I'm like, I'm not eating sugar right now.
Right.
Because when I do eat sugar, it's like, all right, I'm going to have 3 cookies.
Yeah.
You know, not just one.
Right.
So even now in my recovery, I struggle with that a little bit. So I try to, you know, keep boundaries for myself. So really what got me into substance use was with my rambunctiousness as a kid. You don't have the language to say to your parents, hey, I might be kind of a little bit clinically depressed and have social anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, you're 10 years old.
Right.
You just like
how do you say it, or what do you say?
Yeah. I don't want to do my homework. I don't like going to school.
Right.
Right. That's all you know.
Yeah.
And you act out. So my parents took me to a child psychiatrist, which back then was all the rage. I'm 32 now. You know, you can do the math. It was in the, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. And a lot of really well-meaning doctors out there. But, you know, I was one of those kids I got the label slapped on me very young as ADHD. I'm not.
And you're not, right? Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think in the modern world with like TikTok and all the dyes and all this stuff, everybody struggles a little bit with attention.
Right.
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 But for a 10, 12-year-old kid,
Yeah.
I was just a kid, man.
There's a lot of like labeling and stuff like that going on.
I think all kids at 10 are ADHD.
Right.
Especially young boys.
They can't keep
Right.
they can't keep their mind on anything.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
More than a few
my
seconds.
son was just tying his shoe this morning and tied one or whatever, and the other one's, he doesn't have a shoe on the other one.
Yeah, he's off to something else.
It's normal, you know?
Yeah.
So
they diagnosed that.
yeah.
Did they see anything else? Was there?
So, you know, the guy that I went to, I'm not going to speak ill of him, but I think he had been diagnosed too with ADHD. And I think that the medication that he was on helped him a lot. So I think he genuinely wanted to like offer this solution.
Yeah.
So they put me on medication, which is known as Adderall, which for those of you who don't know, Adderall is an amphetamine, right? And that probably sounds very similar to methamphetamine, and it is. Now, let me say this, that if you have there are certain types of ADD and ADHD which stimulants work extremely well for. And there are people who need that medication. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I take it Adderall, and I'm going to stop taking it. Don't do that.
Right.
Not what I'm saying. But for me, it was not the right thing, right? And it happens to a lot of kids. And we could get into a long episode on some of the overprescribing practices in the United States and all the things like that play into addiction and all kinds of mental health problems. We don't have time for that today. But as a kid, you know, I was 12 years old. The male brain doesn't finish developing until you're 25, right? I mean, I'm 32. My wife's still waiting on my brain to finish developing. She says it never will. Probably won't, right?
Well, you're a guy. No.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. My man brain. Right. So, but here's the thing is I talked about escapism, and, what we know now is there's a part of the brain, which is we call the pain pleasure balance. So pain and pleasure are processed in the same part of the brain, right? Dopamine, endorphins, all those things hit that spot. So the way to think about it is there's two sides, and think of it like a teeter-totter. They're connected, and then they're balancing on a fulcrum. And let's say the right side is for pain and left side's for pleasure. Well, when you push down on one side and then you let up, it has to balance back out, right? Your body always wants to be in homeostasis, which means that in the perfect condition for it to function properly. Like a great example of that is when you run around, your heart rate goes up, you sweat, your body has to cool down so you don't go above 98.9 degrees or whatever it is, so your brain doesn't fry like an egg.
Boil.
Right.
Yeah.
Kill you. So we use dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical, the pleasure chemical, right, to measure every action and substance known to man, to give it a rating on how addictive it could be. So, for example, food has dopamine rating of 50, sex has dopamine rating of 100, amphetamines has a dopamine rating of 1,000.
You're telling me you can rate that now, like with heart rate probably or something, or how do you?
I'm not sure how they get the rating exactly.
Right.
I'm sure they
That's
have an
really
algorithm.
interesting. Yeah.
But they assign ratings to these different things. And like I said, food's 50, sex is 100, and amphetamines is 1,000. Right.
Wow.
So it has the potential to be 10 times more pleasurable than sex. So as a 12-year-old kid, I took this medication. If I had the type of ADHD that it was supposed to be prescribed for, it would make me feel normal. But since I didn't, it made me feel high.
Oh, wow.
I became euphoric, right?
Describe that feeling. It was just kind of feel good or feel more like.
It was like drinking some really strong cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And you're excited, you want to talk a lot, you really want to express your feelings, you have a lot of emotions, a lot of it's overwhelmingly positive emotion. It's euphoria, which is like the overwhelming sense of well-being. And then the opposite side is that it's dysphoria, which is the overwhelming sense of impending doom.
Did it make you feel like your anxiety went away?
It did, yeah. It made me think I didn't really care what other people thought.
Yeah.
Which was the thing that I was always looking for, right?
Uh-huh.
So to me, this opened the door for experimentation to substances. I think for a lot of people, and you'll see this later on, but when you talk about stimulant abuse and opioid abuse, a lot of people were introduced to those substances by their doctor first, with good intentions by the doctor 9 times out of 10, right? But unfortunately, the addicted brain doesn't differentiate between good intentions and bad.
Mm-hmm, right.
So as a kid, then I was like, hey, I didn't even know what I was doing, but I was like, hey, one's good, three is 3 times better. So I would save up 2 or 3 at a time and take them on a different day, and I'd feel really good, And again, my parents, they weren't aware. I mean, as a parent, you watch out for things, but you're not, you give the kid the pill. You don't really, when the kid's 12 or 13 years old, you're not like, I need to watch him and make sure he swallows it. Like, show me your mouth,
Right.
You assume he's taking his pills.
Sure.
And you're probably like you said, you're hiding feelings too.
Mm-hmm.
You're not showing all those bad sides. Mm-hmm. You're showing that excited side, that good mood side.
Yeah, and when they're doing check-ins, how's the medication working? Great.
Yeah.
Because it was, right, for me.
Right.
At least in my mind.
How long did you take that?
Probably for 4 or 5 months. It wasn't a terribly long period of time.
Yeah.
And why I went off the medication, I can't remember specifically. I think part of it was causing me gastrointestinal issues, which is common with stimulants. You drink a lot of coffee, you might have to go to the bathroom, right?
Right.
So it was giving me those kinds of problems. Probably because I was also fluctuating my dosages. That didn't help at all either.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But that opened the door. So, then I'm like 7th, 8th grade. And around that time is when you start, going over to spend the night at friends' houses. And then as normal kids do, though, you get into, drinking the parents' wine coolers, stuff like that. Normal kid stuff, right?
Right.
But the problem is I always tell people that the first time I ingested a substance, each substance I can pretty much pinpoint where I was when I ingested it, the feeling that I had. And that's how I know it hit me different than other people.
When you injected it.
Ingested.
Just
ingest,
different
Ingested.
things, whether it be a wine cooler or whatever, right?
Yeah, right.
You just like, well, this has a good feeling or whatever, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Like the first time I drank alcohol, I can distinctly remember, like where I was, how I felt, and my thoughts during that time was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Like this is what, and I remember when I would try a new substance, I would always be like, this is what life's really about.
Yeah.
Feeling
Yeah.
good. Because I felt bad in my own skin
Yeah.
most of the time as it was.
Uh-huh.
So it was like a mini vacation for me when I would become inebriated on whatever it was. And it's like, oh, I can get away, escapism, right? I can escape my reality
Yeah.
and be the person that I always feel like I should have been and feel the way that I always wanted to feel. So, I mean, that's a very gripping feeling as a person who struggled for so long with just not enjoying reality.
So forgive me for I can keep interrupting, but so during the school day, at least at the beginning, you weren't taking these drugs and going to school that way, right? Or were you?
Well, just the Adderall in the beginning, but that was prescribed. And then when I got to high school, that's when I got introduced to like marijuana, about like probably between my freshman and sophomore year. And that was pretty significant for me. And that turned in very quickly to an everyday thing, where it was, where it was doing it at home at night, doing it in the morning when I got up, doing it before school if
With
I
your
could,
friends?
with my friends.
Yeah, sure.
But I guess one of the things that probably stood out to me the most, and this is always like a hallmark sign of addiction. Specifically, they use it with alcohol, but you could use it with other substances too. If you're using it alone on a consistent basis, that's usually a little bit of a red flag. Like if you're just at home on a Friday night and you're like, I'm going to get wasted.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why?
Yeah. What's the reason? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But even for, somebody that was, 15 years old, getting stoned out of my mind in my room, it's like, what are you doing that for? And people would ask me questions like that, and I didn't really have an answer other than I just like the way it feels, So, throughout high school, I just got introduced to all kinds of stuff, really where things took off. I mean, obviously you could look back and say things were already pretty well off on their way. But what really changed the game for me was my sophomore year. I played football and I got injured. I tore my labrum in my shoulder. And that's when I got prescribed my first prescription of opioid pain medication, known as Percocet. Opioids are incredibly powerful, right? Most countries use it for like end-of-life pain, or you snap your leg in half, right? There's a whole backstory to all this, but Purdue Pharma, you guys have probably heard a lot about Purdue Pharma over the years with the Hulu TV show like Dope Sick.
Right.
There's been a ton of stuff that's come out. The Sackler family with Purdue Pharma.
Big lawsuits.
Oh, huge,
Yeah.
massive settlements. So, they came out with this whole campaign, like pain is the fifth vital sign. We're going to cure the world's pain was their motto, right? The whole idea was that you shouldn't be in pain, which is ridiculous. But,
The fifth vital sign. What, like, does that mean the last vital sign or what?
it would mean you would loop that in with things like heart rate, blood pressure, all the O2, like things that a vital sign literally that would show you're still alive and functioning as you should.
Yeah.
Like body temperature. And so basically they were saying is if your pain is above a certain level, like this is dangerous, we should treat it as such, which simply isn't true. I mean, it's a loaded statement, but you can't really die from pain, at least not the pain they were treating with it.
Right.
Like if you have a headache, you don't need a Percocet, you're going to be fine.
Right.
Drink a little water maybe.
Yeah.
That's probably what it is. So when I got that prescription, I just remember that was really what changed my life. I remember the first time I took a Percocet, I always tell people it was like a semi-spiritual experience for me, where I was like, this is how I should feel every single day for the rest of my life, no matter what it takes. Hands down. Just made me feel the most okay I had ever been, beyond okay. I felt phenomenal. Like think of, like a scene in a movie where the person is experiencing the climax of the movie and it's a good part of the movie and it's the happiest part of the movie. That's what it made life feel like all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is the way, that sent me down this road of not only trying everything, whether it be, you could name about any drug, but doing it as much as possible, but doing it in a way that everything else took a backseat to it, right? If we were going to run errands at Target, I had to get messed up first, you know? I mean, if there wasn't, go ahead.
You were playing football, you got hurt, so you couldn't play again right away. Did you play again later?
I did. I played throughout high school, and I ended up having a total of 3 shoulder surgeries, which was part of what also fed the beast, if you would, the addiction, right? Where I kept getting these prescriptions of pain medication. And again, the doctor, I went to go see the doctor the other day, the same doctor, he gave me an injection in my knee. He obviously doesn't prescribe me opiates anymore because I'm off all that stuff, but he had great intentions. He was literally trying to keep me comfortable so I could do my physical therapy rehab. This is like, I don't blame him at all. Now, the system as a whole, we could have a larger conversation about some of the nefarious characters behind it. But most doctors, and he wasn't doing crazy overprescribing. He's not one of the guys that was getting his door kicked in his office and getting raided by the feds.
Yeah.
There are some of those guys, and I did see some of those guys.
Yep.
So, you know, again, like by the time I finished high school, and when I say finished high school, they gave me a diploma. Let's just say that.
Right.
Okay? They were tired of me.
Yeah, they wanted you out of there.
Oh, man. I think they felt a little bad for me, too. They could tell I was going through some stuff. But overall, like, you know, I cut a lot of class. I was not reliable. But I was I wasn't somebody that would flip a table over and yell at you. I would like nod my head and like yes sir you to death, and then just go do what I was going to do. So I think that they were like, he's got some problems, but he's not an a-hole,
Right?
you know. So I think they were like, all right, he'll figure it out hopefully at some point. But then again, none of them knew how deep it went. I think people on the surface could tell there was some stuff going on, but they didn't know that I was, you know, like getting, you know, I used to drink vodka at school. I used to get drunk at school. You know, like I would take a Gatorade bottle and you'd drink half the Gatorade down, you'd pour vodka, and then you'd have half vodka, half Gatorade throughout the day. I mean, it's pure insanity, right? You're 18 years old, drunk at school.
Yeah.
But who thinks about that?
And you were driving yourself there? And
Yeah.
Well, and it's one of those things I wanted to, you know, touch on today too, is like those people in your life at that time too, maybe didn't know how to help either.
Oh, sure.
You know what I'm saying? Because like I had an instance with, and I wasn't sure if I was going to bring it up today or not, but with a welder.
Sure.
And I came in one day, and Jake knew him well, and his face was in the soup, and we had to pull him out of the soup and like call, you know, his sister, his mom, and everything, and still to this day, because you know, a few years later, he actually overdosed, and few years to this day, I still think about like, could I have helped? You know, could I have done something different? You know, you just, I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah. It's super hard. It really is.
well, there's a privacy issue as well. Like where do you draw the line between going too far and saying, hey, I'm concerned about this guy, but at some point you have to kind of hit a wall and go, that's about as far as I can take it.
Right.
It's really hard. It is. And, you know, like I joke around, like I'm making light of some of this stuff, but obviously it's not really funny. I joke because now I can joke about it that it happened to me.
Yeah.
But obviously I take it all very seriously. So like when you asked me if I drove to school drunk and I chuckled, I don't think drunk I was funny. Actually, quite the opposite. I deal with the bad end of it quite often.
Sure.
It was more just like silly that happened and I did it. You know what I mean? So, but it is certainly one of those things that's incredibly difficult to know. Number one, how to approach somebody. And then number two, where do you get resources? Who do you call? And then number three, how hard do you push? You know? And it's one of those things for me where I think honesty and being direct with people is probably the best way to go about it. And just approaching them with care and concern, just being like, hey man, like, I can really tell you're struggling.
Right.
There's some stuff going on that's not only dangerous for you, but dangerous for people around you, you know? And then, you know, finding a way to hook them up with people that can have that conversation more in depth, whether it's a treatment program or somebody that you know who's maybe been through it, who can say, hey, look, like I've been where you're at. I get it. I know it's tough. Because a lot of people come at you with, well, you don't know what it's like. And it's okay to say, you know what, I don't. But I know someone who does.
Right.
And I'd like for you to talk to them. And they might say, no, screw you. And then it's like, okay. But when it comes to how like hard do you push, I take this sounds a little, it comes from experience when I say this, that I tell people, be persistent. And I say that because I've had to stand in front of a lot of people while they are in a casket and think about, did I say everything that I needed to say? Did I try as hard as I could? And in the beginning, there were some people where the answer was no. And that ate me up. It ate me up. It kept me up at night. So now when I come across somebody, they get frustrated and they get annoyed with me. And they're like, dude, lay off. And it's like, look, I know that in 2024, a lot of people are concerned about not upsetting people, not hurting their feelings. I don't care about your feelings. I'd rather you be alive and hate me than dead and be my biggest fan.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
you're direct and persistent. You're just like, until you answer my question, you know what I mean? Right.
I do it with love and I do it with compassion. Now, sometimes I am rather direct. And there are times when it's like, hey, buddy, look, like you might not like that I'm having this conversation with you, but the matter of fact is you're here at work or wherever we are, you're drunk. You drove here drunk and you might think you don't have a problem. And if you want to drink and you want to destroy your life, I hope you don't. But at the end of the day, you taking yourself down the road is different than you getting in your car and driving here and putting everybody else at risk, right? So that's where I draw some boundaries too with people. And I'm like, look, I don't want you to kill yourself, but if you're hell-bent on drinking yourself to death, that's your right? You can do that. I'm going to fight you on it. But what I'll be damned if I let you do is hurt other people through your poor choices, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I have called the police on many people who are hammered, whether it's at, our center or during an intervention, and they get to leave, they get in their car to leave, and they're like, I'm driving. I'm like, if you want to go down that road, that's fine. But I absolutely would rather see you in handcuffs than pull up on a scene where you wrecked into a van full of kids. Or it's not even about always hurting other people. It's like, God forbid I find you wrapped around a pole or a tree.
Right.
Because you're not in your right mind.
Yeah.
So I got to protect you from yourself sometimes. Yeah.
I feel like we jumped from high school.
Yeah, we can go back to that.
I don't want to drag you back there, but if there's more that you want to share about that.
Well, I made it through high school and I went to college and I went to go to University of St. Francis to play football. They took a chance on me because they thought I was a decent football player. They knew my grades weren't quite where they wanted them, but they were willing to work with me a little bit. And I had a great experience there for the most part, and what I mean by great experience is we'll get to the part where I failed out and left or got kicked out. But while I was doing the things I was supposed to be doing, honestly, getting to college was a big deal for me in the sense that it was kind of a fresh start where there wasn't all that bad history that was there with the people at school. I don't blame the people at my own school. Like, they did the best they could, but whether you like it or not, you're always going to run that person to a certain extent through the lens of the history you have with them. There I had no history, and so I was around a lot of like-minded people who were striving for things. And one thing that we do know for sure is that the opposite of addiction is human connection. So I made a lot of great connections, especially with people on the football team, whether it be coaches, whether it be players, other people in the university, whether it be professors, whether it be, some of the staff, the religious staff that was there, great people. And, for a while they were able to help kind of bring me along. But here's the key is that I didn't deal with the underlying issues as to why I used drugs and alcohol the way that I did. So with that being said, I probably made it through 2.5 years roughly of school. In the beginning, I did really well with my grades. It was one of those things where I was never a good student, but I got to college and got to study things that I liked, so I did really well. And it was a little less, high school, you're managed very closely. But I had a little more autonomy, and I thrived in an environment like that for some reason.
What were you studying?
History. Yeah.
So you like history?
Yeah. A lot of people hate it, but I liked it. There's usually only like 4 of us in the class.
Right.
But I loved it, man. I still do to this day. I'm a huge history guy. And I also enjoy business too. I did some of that stuff as well. I was a big economics guy too.
Yeah.
And those two things kind of go hand in hand a little bit, right? Yeah. So long story short though, I end up, football's a violent sport. I get injured again, back on the pain pills. But around this time, this was around 2012, 2013 is when I really, really bad fell off the wagon. and just like reached this point of no return. And part of that was because around that time is when they were really cracking down on the overprescribing of opioid pain medication. There were some doctors here in town, Dr. Cozy and I think it was Cozy and Hendricks, they were the ones that got raided by the FBI in the local police department. And they were seeing so many patients. I think, what was it? They were churning out like $1 million a month cash.
Oh my gosh.
Something crazy like that. And when they got raided, they estimated that that practice created over 10,000 opiate addicts in Allen County alone.
Wow.
Which is a crazy number.
So like a fake doctor?
I mean, they were real doctors, but they didn't take any insurance. It was all cash.
Oh my gosh.
It turned out that Cozy was giving prescriptions out for obviously cash, but like other favors, things that you don't want to mention, just a lot of bad, shady stuff, right?
Right.
I think for some of these doctors, the money and the power, I think some of them felt untouchable too.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, I got a white lab coat, I got a degree.
Yeah.
I'm doing things as far as everyone else is concerned on the up and up. So that kind of stuff is why we have the prescribing guidelines and a lot of the things in place now where pharmacies track how many prescriptions you have when it was prescribed, and it'll raise red flags if you try to doctor shop and all this
Yeah,
stuff.
can you imagine that many getting like order for that much?
Yeah.
Like now. Like,
It's crazy. I mean, it was nuts, the amount of pain medicine that you could walk out of a doctor's office. You take an old x-ray in there, old MRI, look at you for 3 seconds. They're like, yeah, 180 pills. Here you go. See you in a month. It's like, dude, it was crazy. No wonder we're in the spot we're in now. But it was just one of those things that it's even like hard to wrap your mind around. Even having witnessed it, it's hard to wrap your mind around. So they got shut down, but this happened across the United States. They were knocking these doors in left and right, locking these doctors, and they should have been, right? Like, these people deserve to go to prison. But what happened is when you shut off the supply, opiates are a medication that you form very quickly a physical and psychological dependence to, right? If you don't have it and you've been taking it every day for, let's say, a month or more, the withdrawal symptoms you're going to go through are hellish. I mean, you're talking the worst flu you've ever had mixed with a panic attack. Like the mental and the physical side effects together. Like I said, that drugs give you a sense of euphoria, which is overwhelming sense of well-being. And then the withdrawal is dysphoria, which is this overwhelming sense of impending doom, anxiety, depression.
And how long does that last? Like,
it depends on the opiate, but typically what you see is anywhere from 5 to 10 days.
Wow.
And it's disgusting what happens. But
that also causes some intestinal issues when you take those opiate stuff. That
100%.
I've had some surgeries and took those for a day or so, and it's like, there is no way in hell I'm going to keep taking these things.
Yeah,
because you don't feel well.
Tearing you up.
Oh, you can cause some problems.
Yeah,
because they're not meant for extended use, but we started using them for that for various reasons. So you got people that were physically and psychologically dependent. So the quote unquote legitimate and safe supplies cut now. Where do they go? They go to the street, right?
Yeah.
And that's where heroin just skyrocketed. Super cheap product, very powerful. The drug cartels they have to stop treating them like they're just ragtag groups of gangs. They're not. I mean, they're corporations. I mean, they know what they're doing. They have business plans. They have attorneys. They have manufacturing.
Still to this day.
Oh yeah. They're so powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's trillions of dollars.
Yeah, one of my drivers was saying that. He was like, "Well, there's trucks that go through Fort Wayne with that stuff, and they always like say like the ones that are stopped on the highway, and there's no driver there. You're like, why is that?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it's scary stuff, man.
It's awful. And so they were smart. They brought in heroin that was very versatile. It was powder heroin, which was very new, at least new in mass production. So it was versatile, meaning you could snort it, you could swallow it, you could inject it. It was water soluble. All you had to do was drop it in water, and you could do whatever you want with it, right?
So you could just inject it in like water, shake it up, and
put it in water. You stir it up. Some people put fire to it, but they don't recommend that. You stir it up, and then you draw it up in a syringe through a piece of cotton to try to get out the impurities, which doesn't work super well.
Right.
And then you inject it.
So they're trying to be healthy about it, but they're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that first time you injected something? Tell us about that experience.
Yeah.
What were you doing? Where were you? Who were you with? You don't have to name names, but
Sure.
and then you're like, okay. I mean,
I bet that was a scary like moment too, right?
Not really. I mean, by the time you get to using needles, you're pretty far along. At least you've pushed a lot of boundaries you never thought you would. You know, we always tell people like, there's a lot of things you'll say you'll never do. You're gonna do them.
you did it.
And you'll be surprised at yourself and quite disgusted. So you know, it was 2012 and it was Christmas break from college, and I had been using somewhat intranasally, so snorting some heroin, and again, that's because the pills had been taken up off the street, and they were so expensive. Like you're talking $1 per milligram now, which, you know, let's say you do 2 Oxycontin 80 milligrams a day. You're looking at a $160 a day habit.
Whoa.
I mean, that's rough. Whereas you can go buy a bag of heroin, which they cut it into grams, and then they divvy it out even smaller into tenths of a gram. So you could buy 1/10 of a gram for like $20, which would make you feel fine. You could do half of it or a quarter of it sometimes and feel good for 6 hours and then go back. So super cheap, right? Was the only alternative. So I had switched to that, and I wasn't physically dependent yet quite, but I was psychologically dependent for sure. And when I switched to the needle, that is when I became physically dependent. I remember I was in one of my friends, his cousin was our dealer, and you know, he had been on it for years, and he injected both of us the first time. And,
He did it for you.
yeah,
Man.
it's intimidating the first time you're trying to do it. You know, if you've never stuck yourself with a needle,
Yeah.
you're a little bit worried about it.
Yes.
But I'll say when you do it and then you get the feeling, you get over it pretty quick. It becomes very worth it very quickly. And soon that's all you want. So really where it got crazy for me though was down on the south side of Fort Wayne. There was a house I hung out in with this guy who was a heroin dealer who, you know, I would just hang out with him all day and we would get high. And then
Did you like stay put, like kind of stay in that house and just be high in the house? And
yeah. I mean, that's the thing is when you get to this level of addiction, you don't do a whole lot of social activities.
Yeah.
Your whole life becomes centered around using the drug and then getting resources to turn them into money for the drug, right? It becomes the focal point of your life almost entirely.
Yeah. Like your job.
I mean, yeah, it's like a full-time job,
Yeah.
but only there's no business hours.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's 24/7,
24 hours a day.
365.
Yep.
So it was pretty expensive, not to derail this or anything. It was pretty expensive. How were you able to just pay for that? Just
Well, it gets expensive. It doesn't start out expensive.
Good question.
yeah.
But something that you build up.
You always have the good questions.
It's a great question. You build something that's called tolerance, which means your body quickly adjusts to the dosages you're taking in, right? And a good example most people can understand is like when you first get to college, you're drunk off 6 beers, right? By the time you leave, you can crush 20, right? For most people, you know, or 10 or 12, whatever it is, right? With heroin, it's the same thing. Opiates, same thing. You know, you're doing 1/10 of a gram of heroin a day. A year later, you're doing a whole gram a day. You know, and even 1/10 of a gram is not getting you to the point where maybe it make you not sick, but you don't feel it at all, you know? So really, I mean, as you guys can imagine, long cycle of trying to get off, not able to get off, or I would get off for like a couple days and back on. The withdrawals kept me going back and forth. I withdrew from school, told them kind of what was going on. You know, they gave me a break. I really thought I'd get my life together. It didn't work out so well. Went back, told them that I was good to go back. Wasn't good to go back. Had to pull out again. Left. Spent some time really drilling down on trying to get sober. Ended up in St. Joe Behavioral on 3 different occasions, which is, for those who don't know, it's shut down now, but it was basically a psych unit in the hospital. That's really where you're supposed to go if you're homicidal, suicidal, really a danger to yourself or others, right? But there was really nothing at that point. This was like 2013, 2014. There was really nowhere else to detox in Fort Wayne. So you had to put yourself in a psych unit. And so I did that 3 or 4 times. I did a lot of like outpatient work with like, St. Joe Behavioral, Parkview Behavioral. Met some really great group facilitators, therapists, and other people in those programs. But my disease just, and that's what we call addiction to disease to a certain extent, progressed so quickly and was so deeply rooted, that stuff just wasn't enough for me. And my parents, God bless them, they tried so hard. And this is one thing that we see with a lot of families is they struggle so much with how to help and how not to enable. Like as a parent, every instinct in you is saying, make sure your child's fed and they're clothed and they have a safe place to sleep, but what do you do when they start stealing from you? What do you do when people show up to the house looking for them because they owe them money? What do you do when the police start banging on your door at 1 a.m. to see if you're there because they want to talk to you about break-ins at, a different house or at Kroger, right? You want to believe your kid, you love them. You start to try to tell yourself money's not important. The stuff they steal isn't important. And then, like for me with my parents, they probably about got divorced over it, right? Because one's like, he's got to go. The other one's like, no, he can't. Like, he's got to stay.
Yeah.
I have a younger sister and I have an older sister. My older sister, luckily for her, was off in school in Chicago, and then she moved to New York after college. But my younger sister, 7 years younger than me, and she had to bear witness to all of this.
So you were at home a good chunk of this time.
I was in and out quite a bit.
Yeah.
There was times where they sent me away to try to help me get sober on different, kind of trips or stays at other, programs.
Yep.
And I went down to Indianapolis for a while, tried a program down there, ended up getting kicked out. It was a religious program, and at the time, I don't want anything to do with God. That was the last thing on my mind. And I didn't believe in God, and if there was a God, I didn't like him. Because why would he make me a drug addict?
Yeah.
And so, I got kicked out of that program, and I was homeless in Indy for a little bit.
Yeah. So your younger sister saw all of this.
Oh, yeah.
And how do you think that has impacted her?
Well, luckily my parents got her in counseling. I've been in recovery 7 years now. And so she went through a lot of counseling, which was helpful. But she also now is a master's level social worker that works with people in the hospital that struggle with similar things. So I think it kind of, I think it was very traumatic for her, and it was awful. And I've had to make amends to her since. But I think one of the things that's been afforded to us was the fact that I recovered, and we were able to rebuild that relationship. And then she was able to not be continuously re-traumatized by it. And so it took a lot of intentional work on her part, and there was a lot of pain, but I think ultimately now she's a stronger person because of it. Yeah. But it was horrible for her at the time. I can only imagine.
And how's your relationship with her now?
Great.
That's good.
We're very close.
Good for you.
Yeah, we're very close. And, my relationship with my parents has been restored, luckily. And, but like I said, during that time, it was such a struggle for them, and they would kick me out of the house sometimes, rightfully so, because they couldn't trust me, and it also wasn't safe for me to be there. I would overdose in their house, the ambulance would have to come, or they'd have to drive me to the hospital. So, like I said, I ended up homeless in Indianapolis for a little while, and then I was back in Fort Wayne, and I was living in Fort Wayne with this girl, and there were just a lot of things that went on. I did a lot of stealing from stores. I did a lot of running schemes with people to, convince them to give me money for various reasons. I was very good at talking people into giving me cash for certain things. But eventually, by the end, this was probably early 2017, like early January 2017, I had burned all my bridges. Like everybody was done with me, and rightfully so. Couldn't live with my parents. My ex-girlfriend was pretty much done with me. Anybody that let me into their life, I brought chaos with me.
What about your heroin dealer buddy that you lived with for a while?
By that time, he was in prison.
Oh.
Okay. heroin dealers come and go, as you can imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
That job doesn't have a long career life.
Path there, yeah.
Unfortunately for them. It doesn't come with a 401k or anything like that either. So there's not really a retirement plan in place.
Yeah. Well, it is, but it's behind bars.
Right. It is paid for by the taxpayers, but it's not quite as luxurious as you would like.
Yeah.
You do get 3 meals a day. So, even among that group of people, and that's the thing is like I had a lot of friends at one point in my life, and slowly but surely what you see is the people who don't do drugs start leaving your life because they don't want to be around it. And it's not because they don't like you or they didn't care about me. They don't want to be around what came with it.
Yeah.
Like who wants to hang out with you while you're sweating and throwing up, and then you leave for a couple hours to go steal something, and then you got to take that something and turn it into cash, go hang out with some shady person to get some drugs, come back to their house, inject yourself with drugs and possibly overdose. They don't know.
Yeah.
And they're like, dude, I love you, but
Yeah. And it's like you become uncharacteristic.
you
right?
do. You
You're
become a
like,
different person.
Different person. It's like, that's not who I like to hang out with.
No.
Yeah.
No. And so, basically they all cared about me, but for very good reason, they all had to take a step back. So at that point, the only people that are around you are people that are either fellow users or dealers. Dealers are only around you if you have something to give them, like cash. Other than that, they don't let you hang out because even dealers look at you like, you're a junkie, right? Like, they don't want you around.
Amazing.
They know you're trouble. They know you're going to be asking them for free stuff.
Yeah.
You're causing problems, Same thing with other people that are using. Like you've got your using friends, quote unquote, but man, again, same thing. Like unless you're sharing with them, unless you're pulling off some kind of scheme together to rip somebody off or steal something, they don't want to be around you.
Yeah.
It's a miserable life, So I was kind of very isolated. My family would talk to me, but they didn't really talk to me because they knew money was going to come up. And so, I'm living in my car basically in 2017, early 2017, and it's winter and it's cold. And I would be able to crash at people's houses sometimes. They would allow me to for the night. But even my parents, like if they did let me in to crash, they didn't sleep well, first of all, that night. My mom used to tell me like anytime I lived at home, she'd wake up like almost every hour and she'd come in my room with her hand on my back to make sure I was breathing.
Yeah.
So after a certain amount of time, you can't live like that very long. It starts to break you down. I know moms that have had a stroke because they try to like keep the person alive and get them on the right path, and the stress,
Trying everything. Yeah.
it ages you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were a guest on a Fox News show.
Yeah.
When was that?
That was back in fall of 2022.
22.
And then I also was on Fox Business a couple times in 2023.
So you were recovered. You were on the right path. Where'd the transition take place? I want to come back to those shows, but where did transition take place where you went from being a junkie to not being a junkie?
Yeah. I mean, I was living in my car in 2017 and it was February at this point. And so like the girl that I was dating at the time, who was an awesome human being, still is, like I took advantage of her like I did everybody else. And, like I'd gone back to her house after I'd used her car and her phone because I'd sold my phone. I don't remember what's wrong with my car, but or maybe it wasn't my car. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I bought drugs, and these are the same drugs too that this dealer, this batch had been going around Fort Wayne, had fentanyl in it, which is synthetic opioid, 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine, which is a whole nother sidebar conversation. But it's on all the drugs now, and it's very deadly. That's why people are dying.
And what is it that's in there?
Fentanyl.
Fentanyl.
Yeah, synthetic opioid.
Yeah.
And so this was in the drug supply. So I had friends who had died recently from this. But when I was that far in, dying is very low on your list of concerns, And so I was using this, and I had already overdosed multiple times by this time as well. And so I'm at my ex-girlfriend's house, and I'm taking I'm in the bathroom. I'm like, I'm going to take a shower, And I take my drugs, and I just remember being like, wow, that was more than I thought it was. And then the next thing, I'm waking up and I'm looking, and there's firefighters and EMTs standing over me, and the door of the bathroom is shattered into like a million pieces. And I'm like, oh, I messed up. And I fell against the door when I overdosed, so they couldn't get it open. So they had to smash it down.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And they were able to revive me, take me to the hospital. I left the hospital AMA, which is against medical advice, and went back to the same dealer, got the same drugs, went back to the same house, locked myself in the bedroom this time, did it again, OD'd. They had kicked the door open.
Within a short period of time.
I mean, within like 12 hours, yeah.
Whoa.
It was quick. And I mean, the firefighters and EMTs were like, and the police were like, dude, what are we going to do with you?
Right.
And they said, if this happens a third time, you might not make it. And I said, okay. I said, well, if it does, then don't come, because at least I won't have to get up and do all this tomorrow. My family can finally move on. You guys don't have to come here.
Yeah, they can do something productive.
I'm like, I'll be dead. My problems are gone.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, that sucks. They were like, we're not going to accept that.
Yeah, that's not the answer, right?
Well,
No.
they must have seen something in you that made them think, hey, this is an okay guy.
I think so. I think that they were struggling themselves, because in 2016 there were 68 overdose deaths, and in 2017 there was 128. So they doubled.
In Allen County?
Yeah, in Allen County in a year. So they were seeing a lot of dead bodies.
Yeah.
And I think that they're human beings. People forget first responders are human beings, and it hurts their heart when they find someone who passes away, especially a kid having to tell some kid's parents who's 19 years old, hey, your son's gone.
Yeah.
And I'm 24, 23 at this point, but regardless, you're a kid.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and like you would have never said those things sober. Like, something comes over you, right?
Absolutely.
And you're like, yeah, it's just.
It's almost borderline like you're possessed.
Yeah, right.
And you are by the disease of addiction. So they were like, okay, every time that happens, they're supposed to call a narcotics detective. So they call this guy. His name is Detective Mark Gerardo, Florida Police Department. Veteran of the force, been in vice narcotics 20 years, whatever it is. Was Air Force Special Forces, biochem degree from Purdue University, smart guy, top tier, SWAT team sniper, man's man. Like I always joke, if you get kidnapped and you got one phone call, like in the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, you'll call him. And he'll find you halfway around and kill everybody with a pencil,
Maybe he needs to be a guest on this show.
Oh, he would be phenomenal. Yeah. He's got, oh man, you wouldn't believe. So this guy, and he'll tell you this, that he was on his way home, long day of overdoses, people in body bags, just pure sadness,
Right.
This heaviness, He's going home, talking to his wife on the phone, unbuckles his bulletproof vest, and the call comes, and he tells him, I'm done for the day, I'm going home. And he says while on the phone with his wife, he's like, hey, actually, I'm not going to make it home for dinner. Something's telling me to go to this.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to go.
Dude.
So he
chills.
He turns his car around, buckles his vest back up, comes to the scene, walks in, doesn't really say much to me. And I'm like, this guy's here to try to he's going to take me to jail, and he's going to try to turn me into a confidential informant. That's exactly what's going to happen. And so
Did you know him?
No.
No.
Didn't know him from anybody. Stranger to me. To me, he's a cop. And at that point, me and cops didn't get along. I was criminal, through and through,
Yeah.
And so he waits for everybody to leave. I'm like, what is this guy doing? Is he going to beat the crap out of me? What's he going to do? Is he going to, And he sits down, he turns off his radio, and he takes his earpiece out, and he says, how'd you get here? I'm like, that's a silly question. I drove, and he's like, no, he's like, don't be a smart ass. He's like, what's going on with you? Tell me your story. And I'm like, is this guy serious? And he's like, I'm serious. And I was like, okay. I was like, what else I got to lose? So I just start talking. I was so broken that I just became an open book and just word vomited for the next hour and a half. Crazy. Never done that in my life. Probably the first time I had actually engaged in what we would call therapy almost, you know? Truly engaged, and just told this man everything. Why, I don't know. And he was like, I want to help you. And I was like, how can you help me? I was like, are you going to take me to jail? And he's like, no. I put people in jail all the time. He's like, he said, there was a guy that came last week who did a presentation for Fort Wayne Vice Narcotics. And he did a presentation on how to send people to drug rehab instead of jail. He said, I want to try that with you. You'd be the first one. So, all right. I said, I don't know what good it's going to do. And he was like, just try it.
Right.
Just come on. Like, you can do this. I believe you can do this. And I'm like, all right, well, he seems to think so. I was like,
you got one guy on your side, right?
one guy. And of course I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Go back to my freezing car where the gas light's always on and I'm starving?
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. So I'm like, all right, dude, let's see. Calls the dude, gets it hooked up, has me on a plane the next day to go to Florida to go to treatment. And, in that time period before I went, like I was trying to get more drugs. And I always say it's a God thing. I wasn't able to. I guarantee I would have died. I just died twice.
Right.
Almost quite literally.
Well, yeah, and you had no money because you sold your phone.
Right.
For
I
drugs.
sold my phone. Like my car was not worth anything. Yeah. Like I didn't have any. I had sold all my clothes that were worth it. Like I was bottom of the barrel, scraping the barrel. And so they get me to Florida, and I go down there, and I'm down there, and I go to this program where, it's like this clinical program. First they detox me, then it's like this clinical program with housing, plus they're going to 12-step meetings. I'm like, what is this? This is weird. And then all of the like base level staff that's driving us around, they're all sober and in recovery. And I'm like, this is weird. Never been anything like this. And, I'm down there, and then I finally get like a phone call, and I'm like, I'm going to call Gerardo. They're like, okay. And so, he asked the guy that sent me, he's like, yeah, give him my narc number. I don't want this guy to have my personal number. So I call him, and I'm like, hey man, I'm doing good. And he's like, great. That's awesome. That's great. And he'll tell you like, he was skeptical. He's like, we'll see.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Partly because he's protecting himself. Don't want to get his hopes up. Right. Like that's part of, I think, how first responders, people like, oh, that cop's he's a dick. And it's like, he's seen so much, a lot of them, not to make excuses, but a lot of them have seen so much and been through so much that's how they create that barrier where they don't want to get to know you because they might find you in a car wreck, So he was like, yeah, call me in a month. So I call him in a month, call him a third month, the fourth month. And he's like, this feels kind of good.
And this was his first experiment with this.
Yeah. He's like, And he said, you know what? He said, buddy, you come back to Fort Wayne, you're still doing good. We'll get coffee. I said, all right. He didn't realize it, but like to me, that meant the world. That was like, that's so cool, man.
Yes.
And it's funny because, I always tell people like, you never know the impact you can have. And everyone sees someone like, whether it's a homeless person on the side of the road, which is becoming an increasingly massive problem in Fort Wayne, people addicted to drugs, mental health. And they're like, man, what a bum. And it's like, I always try to think about every single person that I come across, especially people that are struggling in life. It's like that person was a kindergartner at one point that, just like I did, drew a picture in crayon of what they wanted to be when they grew up. And like 99% of us wanted to be a vet or a doctor or a nurse or a police officer because we wanted to help people. And we got off the path somewhere. And I was one of the kids that wanted to be a police officer. And I became the opposite of what I wanted to be. I became a criminal. I became somebody that hurt people. And so to have this police officer be like, you're doing good, buddy. Like, I will have a cup of coffee with you. I was like, oh man, how cool, how cool. Maybe I'm not a piece of trash.
Right. And it's just switched, right? It's just like that.
It wasn't instant, but like, we talk a lot about people having like this spiritual awakening in recovery, right? And a lot of people are looking for like that Saul to Paul conversion on the road to Damascus, right? Where like, God appears to you and then the scales fall from your eyes and, you're changed forever. Well, for me, it was a gradual. Yeah. It had to be very intentional. Like I learned one of the things that made it click for me was recovery is not for people who want it or need it. It's just for people who do it. Everybody wants it. Everybody needs it. But are you going to do it? Mm. So it was like, I don't feel like being sober today. It's like, well, are you going to do it? Yeah. I have to be sober. That's great. But are you going to do it? Yeah. Okay. Though that's a win. That's it. It's simple, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. We always say that, right? And so I'm putting one foot in front of the other. And I end up like making it back to Fort Wayne. And he and we link up and, we start talking and, he'll tell you, that because I always like say, Gerardo saved me, and he's like, dude, Nate saved me more than I saved him. He was like, I was so burnt out. He's like, I was ready to quit, retire. Like, he's like, I couldn't see the point of what I was doing anymore, just because there's so much death and destruction. And, so we start linking up, and it's like this thing where it's like, man, who would have thought that this like textbook, military, veteran police force, Christian guy would be linked up with this like homeless, drug addict, thief, liar, cheating, stealing guy. And now we're like best friends. He came to my wedding when I got married,
Well, and that's when he meant it too.
Oh, dude, yeah, like lifelong relationships and friendships, and so I came back, and my first 2 jobs, which I don't recommend. Well, my very first job when I first got sober, and this is important for people to understand. People get sober and think that they have to get everything together right now. Right now. We say get a job, not the job. I bust tables my first job. And I was humiliated, but it was good for me. It was low pressure. It was humble, just basic stuff. And then I went to doing security because they were like, you're a big dude. What are you doing carrying plates? Go throw that guy out. He's drunk, And so I don't recommend it, but like my second job in recovery was like bouncing at establishments, being private security.
Which probably was hard because
oddly enough for me, it wasn't. I wasn't at that point. I always tell people I was so done. Man. Yeah,
because how long did you spend in Florida?
I was down there probably like 9 months.
9 months? Yeah,
9 months, yeah. I was so done, man, by the time I got sober that I had been homeless. I had been to psych wards.
You were through it.
Did you ever think of killing yourself?
Oh, all the time. I would all the time think about, should I just drive my car into this tree? Like, maybe today I'll just go buy enough heroin to do it all at once, and maybe I'll just fade out.
But something kept you from doing that. What do you think it was?
Man, God.
Yeah.
I mean, really, at the end of the day, like I have no other explanation. Yeah. And I have no other explanation for why I didn't die. I really don't, And so, I came back and I was doing those things, and I actually got wrapped up in this. I was for a short period of time, I thought like my way to give back was to become a bounty hunter, and I did that.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So I was out chasing people down and arresting them. Well, very quickly I found out that, it's a lot of like sleeping in a car for 12 hours and peeing in Gatorade bottles and showering at truck stops. It's like, I fought really hard to get out of that life.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It was a lot like getting high.
At least you get paid for it.
Yeah. But only you don't get high, so there's not that part of it. So it was a lot of misery. And so anyway, long story short, the guy that Gerardo linked up with in the first place that sent me to Florida, his name is Mickey Ashpole, right? He's the one that sent me down to the treatment center in Florida. Well, he calls me when I'm like, was I 9 months sober? Something like that. I hadn't been sober long. And he's like, hey man, what are you doing? And I told him, and he said, what the heck are you doing that for? He's like, you don't have to live like that anymore, dude. And I'm like, this guy, he's right. I don't have to. What am I doing? And so he said, I'm thinking about starting a treatment center in Fort Wayne. I was like, huh. He said, we don't have anything like that in Indiana. I said, oh, I'm well aware. I said, I tried to get sober in Indiana for a long time. And he said, yeah. He said, Captain Hunter with Fort Wayne Police Department and Deb McMahon, who was one of the high people up in the health department at the time, said they want me to open one in Fort Wayne. So I'm going to do it.
Oh, she was the county health commissioner.
Yeah,
I remember her. Yeah.
Great lady. And he's like, do you want to come work for me? And I'm like, I don't know. I never saw myself as somebody that was going to be that kind of person that would work in treatment and help other people. Partly because I think I still struggled like with this. You struggle a lot when you first get sober with imposter syndrome.
What syndrome?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter.
Which is where you feel like you're living out a role that you don't deserve to be in or that you really can't live up to. Mm. It's like, but if people really knew me on the inside, they wouldn't look to me for those kind of things. Yeah. They would see me for what I am, which is a loser. You feel like an imposter living out your life and your role.
Yeah, like a big lie. A big lie.
100%.
Yep.
And so, I was like, I don't know. But, at the time, the girl I was dating, who I'm now married to, and my parents were like, I think and even the people that I formed some really good relationships with some police officers that I did private security with, and everybody's like, you should do this. You should do this. And I'm like, oh, all right.
So what year are we talking now?
We're talking 2018.
That was like a year after the incident, basically, right? Yeah, jeez.
And so it's like it's like January 2018, And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it. And so I call him back and I take the job and I'm like, what's it going to be called? And he's like, it's going to be called Fort Wayne Recovery. I'm like, okay. I'm like, so it's a lot like the place that I went to in Florida, which he worked at. And he's like, yeah, pretty much just like that. I'm like, cool, I can do that. So I took the job and they gave me the job as the center manager. And so I was in charge of operations. And I think the only reason I got the center manager job in management was because I was the first hire and there was no one else put in that job.
Right.
So I just did everything.
Yeah.
Was what it came down
Dove
to.
into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good for me, though. It was my first real professional job.
Keep you
which I was
busy, I'm sure, too.
Oh, crazy busy, And so then really that kind of helped me, too. And they told me right away, they said, this job is not a substitute for your recovery. You have to work your own program if you're going to do this. So not only do you have to do your sober stuff, but you're going to help people with their sober stuff.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so I'm like, wow, that's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
But it helped me even more because in my mind, I'm like, well, if I'm telling this kid he's got to go do this, this, and this, I better be doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
So I even took it farther. And so for me, it was like this kind of like recovery renaissance for myself where I was reinvigorated to like work on myself even more. And, the story from there is basically been a blur till we got to today, which,
now you're CEO of
I'm CEO of Fort Wayne
Fort Wayne
Recovery.
Recovery. Dude, this story is crazy. Like the full circle of everything is incredible. And it just is the reason that is the reason why you're sitting right here. That's the reason why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah. I mean, I just hearing your story, I believe it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And you don't feel like an imposter now?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I don't. No.
So I got a kind of final question too. Is like what made you, I guess, be comfortable in your skin? What do you think that was?
I think a lot of it was just accepting myself for who I am, but also continuing to develop myself and realizing that everybody is a work in progress, right? Like you're never a finished product. You're always improving. And when you get to know people, like I used to look, especially in early recovery, I would see people who had a 9-to-5 and a house and a car and a family. And I'm like, oh, I could never do that. And then you start doing it and you're like, maybe I can.
Right.
And you realize that everybody around you, just like you are, is figuring it out. One step at a time, stepping out in faith, and just putting one foot in front of the other. And for me, that was very like solidifying and saying, okay, I'm just like everybody else, and everybody else is just like me. So I don't feel like an imposter anymore. And I think that it took me a long time too to see, give myself credit for what I've done. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I mean it in a way that like I did put in the work to get to where I'm at.
Right.
And so that really helps build confidence. And you realize too that when you fail at something, you don't really fail because the only time you really fail is when you quit. So you just learn that everything's a learning experience.
Yep.
And so you give and take and give and take, and that's just life.
Yeah.
And we're all in this process together.
Man, I'll tell you what, like I was just thinking this, you were saved so that you could save too. Because right now how many people are you working with on a daily basis?
Oh man. I mean, between our two programs, Allendale at any given time, we have between 30 and 37 patients. In Fort Wayne Recovery at any given time, we typically run between 35 and 45 patients. So I mean,
daily, right?
Yeah, daily.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, I don't see everybody daily, but I'm involved at some level with, and those are our patients. I mean, we have 120 employees at Allendale and we have 50 at Fort Wayne Recovery.
Wow.
So we're able to touch a lot of people. And I think, for me in recovery, we learn that AA has the saying, it says, you can only keep what you have by giving it away. And so when I give freely, I actually receive, right? So that was one thing too that helped me quite a bit. And we talk a lot about constant thought of others, because if I think about myself all the time, like what makes me comfortable, what makes me uncomfortable, then I get caught in self. And for me, that's very dangerous, because then I want to numb how I feel. But what if I come in and think, what does this gentleman need from me? And then I check in with him and I start talking to him and finding ways to make sure he feels okay.
Man, that's huge.
I don't care what I think now, you know?
So, what if someone needs help with addiction, alcohol, drugs? Can they just contact Allendale or Fort Wayne Recovery? What is there a protocol? What happens?
Yeah, I mean, they can find us like fortwaynerecovery.com, AllendaleTreatment.com. Also, it's easy to remember 833-SOBER-FW. So 833-SOBER-FW. That'll take you right to our phone line.
Okay.
You can also check us out on bareknucklerecovery.com or a Bare Knuckle Recovery Facebook page, which is just a Facebook page that Tommy Streeter and myself created, and he works for Allendale Fort Wayne Recovery as well, as a free resource mapping service. But also we have a podcast where we just talk a lot about addiction from a personal perspective, give people some insight into what they can do, but also we talk a lot to the families, which is a really forgotten piece of this sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, the families suffer so much.
That's who I think of when I think about someone contacting you, is that it may not be the individual who needs the help, but it's the loved ones that don't know where to go.
80% of the time we're talking to a family member.
Yeah, interesting.
Most people are reluctant to ask for help. They're also even more reluctant to accept the help. Most people think that they want to try to do it on their own, or they don't believe they have a problem. A lot of times, so it is a lot of times the family that's like, hey, my son or my brother, my daughter, my husband, my wife.
Yeah.
So.
Tell you what, man, like I know you probably hear this all the time, but you telling your story, I think is super impactful. I mean, being vulnerable and being able to do that, not everybody can do that. Yeah. So for you doing that, thank you for that, because
yes, indeed, indeed,
I
for
really,
your willingness and ability to get it done, especially coming from being a kid who couldn't really talk to anybody.
Yeah, well, I found that sharing my story and other people sharing their story is a great way for someone who's listening to say, oh, that's my story. Mm-hmm. That's me. Mm-hmm. I can do that. Because that's all we want at the end of the day, is for people to get better. And it could be anything. Like, some people struggle with drugs and alcohol. Other people today struggle, I mean, in the modern world, gambling, pornography, food, whatever it is that's taken over your life and has separated you from your family, your faith, whatever it is that's important to you, and you feel like you can't get out of it. Like, there's a way out. You can do it.
There's hope.
There's hope. You just got to fight, you know? And you can do it.
And show up. I can do it. Right? Yeah.
Yep.
And it's going to, I mean, and I tell people all the time, like, recovery, sometimes it does suck. Like, it's not like in the movies where, like, they have the scene where you're walking into a beautiful treatment center, and then it flashes forward a year later where you're sitting in a group of people laughing and enjoying coffee and joking around, and you're getting your 1-year token and you're sober and your family loves you. That's not how it is. It's a lot of sometimes like crying yourself to sleep, saying sorry to people, them not forgiving you right away, you having to show them that you've changed. It's paying fines, fees, old bills, like shoveling crap, you know, like really taking it.
And there's levels of recovery. Yeah, you have a very bigger level, but there's levels.
I don't want to, just one more.
Yeah.
And you may have more questions too, but your connection to these news programs, how did that come about?
That came about largely because of what was happening with fentanyl, which I briefly covered. The synthetic opioid that's 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. There's we could do a whole podcast on that too, but it's so deadly and it's killing so many people across the United States. And the fastest growing demographic that's dying from fentanyl is the 12 to 20-year-old range, right? So it's literal kids in some cases that are dying. So that really was where it got the attention of national news media, people in Congress, which is how I got hooked up with Fox News. in part because so many people I was working with, I mean, from all ages. I mean, the youngest funeral I went to was for a 14-year-old, but a ton of people in their teens and 20s I've helped bury because of fentanyl. And so I got linked up with a lady. Her name's Teresa Juliet, and she's with JAVA, which is Justice, Accountability, and Victims Advocacy here in Fort Wayne. And she lost her son in 2020 during COVID to a fentanyl overdose. And so she got a hold of Tommy and myself, and we met with her, and she brought this coroner's toxicology report with her, like many people did. And she was like, I don't even know what fentanyl is, but it killed my son. And it's like, okay. And she's like, I can't get a lot of answers, but you two seem to know something about this. And so we explained to her, and we had a lot of people coming to us. We'd have people message us or email us toxicology reports from their loved ones, coroner's report saying, what is this fentanyl that killed my kid? Right. It's like, well, this is what it is. Well, where does it come from? Here's where it comes from. Is this a common problem? Unfortunately, sir, ma'am, yes, it is. Well, why is no one talking about it? We were like, I don't know. And they said, well, why don't you talk about it? And we're like, well, nobody's going to listen to us. And they said, just try. And so that's how we started Bare Knuckle on our podcast. Was we literally started just filming videos on an iPhone in one of the offices and started posting it, and it got traction. And people were like, these guys are talking about fentanyl when it wasn't really a thing people talked about. And so I got linked up with Teresa and then we linked up with Jim Banks, Congressman Banks, who took on this, he became very concerned, I think a large part because of so many of his constituents were passing away from fentanyl. And so we linked up, and he actually invited her and I to go to Washington, D.C., and we did a roundtable with some members of Congress, and we shared some of our stories, and we gave some recommendations. They gave us some legislation to look at. We gave them feedback. And then in that process, Fox News reached out, and he linked me up with them. And so they had me on to do that segment where I talked about my life, my history, a little bit, obviously briefly. I got like 5 minutes. And just to bring awareness.
That's a long time on a news broadcast.
It is. It really was.
Yeah, but you rocked it though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was good. And then so they had me on Fox
job.
Business in 2023, 2 different times. One to talk about xylazine, and which is a whole nother, we could do another episode on that. But and then again fentanyl. So it's been one of those things where they've continuously kind of reached out, done some things with them a little bit, and it's one of the things I love talking about. And when I say love talking about it, I love getting the word out about it, because there's still parents out there that don't know what fentanyl is.
Right.
And they don't know how to protect their kids. And that is something that is just...
I think that's most parents.
Oh, it is.
I mean, I think about myself as a kid. I know some of the stupid stuff I did.
Yeah.
My parents had no clue.
Right.
And I don't think they even ever considered the idea that I might do something that was not right.
Well, and we always talk a lot about that kids shouldn't die because of mistakes, right? Like, and the problem now is, and we can talk about this in another episode or whatever, but there are these counterfeit prescription drugs that are out there on the street that are presented as safe and from a doctor by dealers. And so they'll say this is an Oxycontin 30 milligram or oxycodone 30 milligram, Oxy 30, Roxy 30, whatever. And they'll sell it to somebody who thinks that's what it is. And they'll think, oh, well, my grandma took Percocet for her hip or whatever, right? It sounds, and you look it up and it's like, oh, it's legit, pill finder. And it turns out it's got fentanyl in it. And so they die from it. And sometimes it's their first time trying a pill.
Yeah.
It didn't used to be that way,
Right.
Right.
It's rocked the whole United States.
Hey, thank you, Nate, for being here. Thank you for telling your story, for sharing it with anyone that will listen, I'm sure. And we really appreciate you. And by the way, that's a really nice looking shirt you've got on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you what too. Maybe next time you come back here, your book will be done. You're gonna write a book, right? Is that what it is?
I don't know.
And then you could do the audio recording here, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
Great idea.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
No, it's good stuff, man.
So thanks
Appreciate
again.
it.
Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you having me on. And of course, we get our apparel from Business People Productions.
Is that what that was?
Yeah, BP Productions. Give them a look, man.
While we're here, we got Sasquatch Tea for you. Veteran founded.
Love
and
it. Love veterans.
Corporate Holdings, who is a manufacturing company that I work with and family owned. And then who else we got? Oh, Don Polly, the chairs.
Oh, the chairs.
Comfortable chairs.
These chairs are great.
Fairfield Gallery.
Fairfield Galleries. Don Polly, very kind to loan us the chairs.
And Business People Magazine.
And Business People and Corshid. What do you call it?
Corporate Holdings. Yeah.
What is it called?
Corporate Holdings.
Corporate Holdings.
9 different manufacturing companies around town here, so that's good.
The Tom Tippmann and his Sasquatch Tea, and what else do we
I
have?
think that's it, man. And you get one, by the way, so don't leave that one.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then we got Sweetwater Sound.
Sweetwater.
Sweetwater.
We're here.
In the
Good,
studio.
great spot.
That's right.
We would like some more sponsors. So if you're out there and you're interested in being a sponsor of the show, please let us know.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you guys.
Bet.
Boy,